Are you someone that gets stuck in pushing your art to look better and more beautiful? Or are just someone who wants to take that visual look of your art to the next level? Well, this video is for you. The tips in this video will help you to make whatever type of stuff you make, whether it be 3D or 2D art, realistic, semi-realistic, anime styles. These fundamentals that I teach you in this video are going to help you with pretty much all of it, as art isn't just about using the buttons in Blender, but also brushing up on the fundamentals of art as best as you can. Now, to demonstrate these important tips to you throughout this video, I'm going to use a piece I'm working on right now. Actually, it's a scene from one of the animations I'm making right now, which will be released next video, so stay tuned for that. Also, if you're new to Blender, I have a complete beginner's tutorial in the description, so check that out if you need to. And also the cat model for this is available in this video. And now, let's start. Okay, tip number 1. So tip number 1 is the details comparison trick. So now let's go back to the beginning of when I was making this. You'll notice that the floor and pretty much everything looks super bland. There's really no character to it whatsoever. Now, a lot of artists would just sit there and be like, it's fine enough, and hit render. But what I did to improve it was something I like to call a detail comparison. So how do you do this? Basically, this is a process of finding some image similar to the type of scene you're currently making and taking in that detail from it. So take this image for example. You can see when I compare it with mine, it's just way better in terms of its detail on the floor and like tiling area. And since it's better, that means I want to take from this and sort of apply it to my own work somehow. So I took the idea of like these leaf plants that were coming through the cracks, for example, as well as these wood chips that were everywhere, and just the whole like general grungy feel, and applied that into the art that I was making to make it a lot better. So now this might sound obvious, but most people gloss over stuff like this. They don't actually remember to always do this, so that's why I'm mentioning it as one of the tips. It's really important that you find useful images that look better than what you're making, because that will give you a clear vision as to how to improve it. Okay, so tip number 2 is mind your lighting. So I like to consider lighting as the skeleton of any piece of art, really. Lighting is truly one of those things that just totally makes or breaks any piece that you work on. So look at these two images, which is more eye-catching? Definitely the one on the left. So naturally, if you took inspiration from the one on the left in your art, you'd probably have a better time overall. Now, if we examine our Mr. Cat scene here, it looks super bland, but using the image I showed earlier, I grayscaled both our art as well as the image I was looking at to try and see why mine was looking flat. And the reason was immediately obvious. The floor was just so dark, and so I immediately upped its brightness significantly. Not only that, but I felt like this whole area on the left was like really bland, so I threw some foliage above it to cast a shadow down below, which helped it to look better. Honestly, shadows and lighting like that is just like a really fast way oftentimes to get easy detail, so it's just something I like to do. Okay, now once again, looking at some images, I realized that in scenes like this, the lighting isn't just bright, but there's also some sort of an additional gradient of brightness, sometimes from where the sun is coming, just like I'm circling here. So I implemented that here as well by adding a gradient and even some god rays on the left side of the scene. And what that did was it basically gave this effect that doesn't just go bright and dark, it's like bright, then less bright, then dark. And of course the reason I did that was because when I was looking at different lighting images and stuff like that, I just saw that this was something that happens oftentimes, and I wanted to try to see if it looks good here, which it ended up did looking good, so that's why I kept it. Now obviously guys, the lighting here looks a lot different as well, and that's because I added a glare to this whole area, which is something I'm now going to talk about in tip number 3, which is softening the lighting somehow. So there's a lot of ways to do this. You could actually just do it in a whole other software if you want, but I like to do my compositing in Blender personally. So in reality, light isn't just a completely flat thing, it glares and does all sorts of stuff. So generally within Blender, I like to enable compositing to always, and in whatever scene I'm working in, I add a glare node. Usually using glare will make the scene less contrasted, so to compensate, I add an RGB curves node after it to give the scene more contrast. Then I connect everything up with a mix node, so I can slide between what we had previously and what we just made. So this may seem like more of an obvious tip, but it's an easy thing to forget. So it's important to do this to help to tie up the sort of values of your scene all together by making the lighting sort of glaring in certain areas, at least in areas that you know are sort of like being hit by the sun really directly, so that's important too. And another thing in compositing is oftentimes I'll add a lens distortion or something like that. It's just a cool thing if you want to blur the edges or kind of add just any type of distortion like that, so that's another useful node to know. Okay guys, so tip number 4 is what I like to call the art of noticing. So generally, whenever you're making anything, you're going to want to just generally look at the type of objects or creatures you're making to gain a better idea of things and basically realize certain things that you would never have just thought of in your head, if that makes sense. So I know that probably doesn't make sense, so I'm going to explain it now. So for example, when looking at pictures of black cats in warm lighting, I know, super specific, but to make convincing art, you need to get specific and look for the very specific types of things in specific situations that you're trying to make. And I realized by looking at these black cats in warm lighting that they generally kind of have like a rim light from where the sun is coming, and also just a little more harsh light in general coming in that direction. So that's something I applied to my art here with the black cat. You can see I added this rim light, which initially it didn't look great, but then over time I refined it a little bit. And so yeah, that is one change I did from basically looking around and like noticing how things look in reality. Now another thing was that for black cat specifically, the overall highlight color I noticed like isn't very bright because it's, you know, black, so naturally the highlight on it isn't going to be as bright as if the cat was like some other color. Now another thing I noticed was that on the unlit side there's usually some type of bounce light that appears. That's another thing you can see I kind of added to the right side of the cat. Once again, of course, the reason I'm telling you guys this is because looking at pictures of like what you're trying to make and just noticing these really little things is just extremely important in actually leveling up the quality of the work that you make. I'm trying to show you here, like, I don't have, you know, everything in the world in my head, so naturally I have to go out and look at what these things look like in reality and see, and then apply that to my work, right? So another thing I noticed was that black cat ears are a little translucent, so I even created a gradient from left to right to just make the ear a bit more orange, especially where the light is hitting it. So, you know, you see what we're doing here is we're just combining our skill in Blender and making art in general with understanding how to actually make it look better in the first place, if that makes sense, right? So, you know, you learn how to use the tools here, and then after that, you also need to observe the world around you and then apply that and basically use the tools to make the art. So that's kind of like the whole process I'm trying to play you guys here. This is more of like a raw type of video, but so I hope you guys are enjoying this. It's just like an important topic I wanted to talk about. Okay, so this has been tip number 4, the art of noticing. Basically all I'm trying to say here is that you have to observe the world around you, and not just like the big things, also the small things too, because the small things added up make a big difference. So I mean, you can really like start doing this right now. You look around your room, you go outside, you look at the way the trees are, you know, like how light interacts with certain objects and how it can be different if it interacts with like leaves as compared to other objects. So these are just like very important things to notice in the world. And any type of art you're making, you have to approach it with this curious type of mindset. Okay guys, so tip number 5 is final attack strategy, or at least that's what I like to call it. So basically at this point, you've gotten your work to a decent quality, and it's time for basically like a final attack before calling it done. So now is basically when you become sort of a mad scientist and you just experiment with a bunch of stuff and see how it goes, kind of. So obviously for me, I've been making stuff for quite a long time, so I generally know what to do to keep on increasing the quality. But here are some tips that I like to do in this final stage that pretty much always increase the quality to some extent. So A, adding in some type of foreground. You can see I did this here by adding in this chair at the front, and actually it's a thing from the previous scene of this animation, but you know, you guys are going to understand what I mean by that next video. But anyways, I also went around the corners a bit and added in this leaf vine at the top right and a rose at the bottom left. Basically what this does is it just kind of fills the corners a bit better, and by filling the corners you kind of frame the image a lot better in a way, if that makes sense. So yeah, adding a foreground, framing, doing these things helps to make your art a lot better usually. So now my next phase of this final attack strategy would be B, making sure that there's some complementary colors in your scene. Now if you look at my scene here, that's why I added in some red flowers. It was to contrast the green in the scene a bit. But doing this in whatever you're working, obviously I'm sure you guys know like complementary colors are just like a really big thing, a really useful thing, and adding them will just help to add a lot of beauty to your art. Okay, so C, make sure any flat or unfinished areas get detailed. So this is pretty much just any area of your art that looks bland or just like too repetitive. So that's why I added in things like boxes here at the right and played around with the detail on the floor of the scene a little bit more. Doing stuff like this just helps to break it up and not just have it as like a black hat in the center and then just like a sea of tiles. That would be like really boring, right? Okay, so lastly, D, playing around with the lighting strengths to see what looks best. So I did this by basically just testing the shadows to be darker, the highlights being brighter, and ultimately I decided that the lighting was fine, but tinted it to a more orange type of color than what it was previously. And you know, this part is really just like about experimentation animation a bit, see how much you can push the lighting and all of that stuff. And from there, that's basically my last part of this final attack phase. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you learned more about observation and stuff like that. Sorry if this video is a little bit disorganized. I'm trying to also add in some more like raw type of content like this, where I just sort of explain things in addition to the regular type of videos that I do. So yeah guys, and if you're someone who's trying to learn Blender, check out the top link in the description below. It's my masterclass. It's basically a program that teaches you my entire working process and workflow for making things like characters, scenes, environments. Everything you see on your screen right now is actually a course within the masterclass. So it's absolutely just packed with content. It's also a community where we have members improving and sharing their work, and everyone just getting better, which is also awesome. So if you want to save yourself a ton of time and also join an awesome community as well, check it out. You don't need to be experienced to join. It's beginner friendly, as you can start out with some of the easier courses and then progress as you go on. We've had so many students come through and do this stuff, so I know with confidence at this point, it is something you absolutely can do and progress through, regardless of how skilled you are. Anyways, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something new or valuable throughout this video. And yeah, I have more videos coming soon, so stay tuned for that. Peace.